very nice to be here and see so much enthusiasm because I think we live in very important times, and it's not an American issue or a Canadian issue or a European issue. It is a worldwide issue because the times that we live in are different in many, many ways from my viewpoint, because I believe we're in a transition. We're in a transition from a system of economics and politics that's ending. Just as the biggest event in my lifetime was the disintegration of the Soviet Empire. It came to an end, and it was predicted as early as 1912 by Mises that it's not viable. You can't have socialism. You have to have a pricing system. And it came down, but it wasn't replaced by the concept of liberty. It was replaced by what we call interventionism. And that's what we've been living with. Interventionism is government planning, welfareism, inflationism, central banking, deficits are all right. And this type of system comes to an end too, and that's what we're facing today. In almost every country in the West, it's debt. Debt is the big problem because it was taught for many, many years, the Keynesian theory of economics, that deficits don't matter, and if you come up short, you keep taxing the people till the point where they can't be taxed anymore. And then you keep borrowing until you can't borrow anymore. Then they think, well, it's magic. All you have to do is print the money, and it's going to work out, and you can do that for a while. My approach to all this is that's all completely wrong, and it's coming to an end, and there is a replacement, and it can be found in the cause of liberty. One thing I want to talk about for a minute or two are the labels. This is a conservative group, but I'm seen as a conservative. But even the term conservative have relative terms. If you were in the Soviet Union when it was starting to come apart, the conservatives were the ones who wanted to conserve Marxism, and the liberals were the ones who wanted to believe in liberty. The founders of of the United States called themselves liberals. And that term was, in many ways destroyed and undermined. Today, one of the terms that I used to always have sympathy for because it sounds good. Shouldn't we all be progressive? Shouldn't we want to look into the future and see new things? But progressives, I don't know how the word is used up here, but in the States, it's a bad term if you're a conservative. So maybe that's true here too. But then the term libertarian comes up, and that has a controversial connotation. So you have moderates and libertarians and conservatives and liberals and progressives and socialists. And terminology is very tricky. So I've simplified my terminology for what I believe in to a simple term, and that is interventionism. If you believe in interventionism across the board, that means you want the government to tell us what to do with our personal lives, you want the government to tell us what to do with our economic activity, and you allow the government to tell other people around the world what to do. So guess what? I've come down on the side of saying I am a non-interventionist. And that's what freedom is all about. Freedom's, the term has been around for a long time. Ever since the Magna Carta, there's been bits and pieces coming about. But right now, in the States, I would say that we've been going backwards in the last 100 years. We have undermined our monetary system, our free market system, our personal liberties. We have become interventionists overseas. We endorse the idea of central banking. We don't believe in sound money. So in the last 100 years, we have gone on the wrong direction, and it is coming to an end, and the limitation is the debt. And yet the left, the far left, will say that debt doesn't matter. When you get into a problem, what you want to do is to spend more money. So we get into trouble economically. Governments spend too much money, they borrow too much money, they print too much money, interest rates are too low for too long, and then they say, well, now we're in a recession, it's very serious. So what is the solution? Spend more money, borrow more money, print more money, have more intervention. And then they say, Why hasn't the recession ended? So that's really where we are today. So I don't see an end to the recession coming. Yet today, there were very good statistics today on the unemployment rates in the States. You know, that there were more jobs made than it has been for quite a few years, and the inflation and the unemployment rate has dropped. But just as labels can be tricky, we have different statistics. We have government statistics and we have real statistics. But I'm sure that doesn't occur in Canada because you're all very honest and friendly people, and your governments would never want to deceive you into anything. So this past week in New York City, I happened to have had a quick visit in New York City, although they have to really talk me into going to New York City after living in Texas. So, but there was news this week, and the stock market hit new highs. In nominal terms, not in real terms. If you price this in dollars, it's a disaster. The price of the stocks are way, way down. But nominally, and excitement on Wall Street and the people who do trading made a lot of money. Historic highs, over 14,000, exciting. At the same time, it was announced in New York City that there were 50,000 homeless people looking for a place to sleep. Now, isn't that astounding? But it fits in to this understanding of Austrian economics, that some people thrive and some people suffer. Our school system is in bad shape in the States. There was a statistic this morning that said 80% of our graduates from high school in New York City can't read. I mean, this is a big, serious problem. So if you look at the superficial, you might say, well, we're coming out of this. But if you look at the reality is. Now, there's an economist who's an Austrian free market economist by the name of John Williams. John Williams does what he calls shadow stats. So he measures most of the government statistics from the old method, say unemployment. What's the real unemployment according to the old statistic? He says it's 22%. And that sort of explains, why the people feel worse than what the headlines are saying. He says our inflation rate, the price is going up, is 10%. So this in a way explains the discrepancy between the way people feel and the way people are actually going. So there's a simple solution to all this. Don't send anybody to your legislature and to your government unless they tell you the truth all the time. That's what we need. But that's been happening for quite a few centuries because it's supposed to be a noble lie. People get lies from the government because the people can't handle the truth. And I don't accept that. I don't accept it in foreign policy. We in America have been deceived too many times about the threats that we have around the world. We are deceived by, our financial threats, and therefore politicians and the people capitulate, and to the point where they want the government to do more. People become fearful, and they say, yes, do whatever is necessary. This has been especially true in the last 12 years since 9/11. And when people become fearful, they are more willing to give up their liberties. And unfortunately, that's what's been going on. And our civil liberties, and when I talk about ours, I want to make it clear and put in a disclaimer, I'm not talking about anybody other than when I talk about United States, because our civil liberties, the United States, are threatened. This whole idea that our president now believes that he can actually assassinate individuals and have assassinated Americans without due process, that to me is very dangerous. Arrest by the military. These are attacks on civil liberties that cannot persist, and yet people say, well, they're terrorists. Well, they're not terrorists. They're suspects. And if you have, due process, you don't handle it that way. So we've had an undermining. But I think the solution only comes if we have a clear understanding about what liberty is all about. To me, I don't see people in groups. I don't see rights as designated like women's rights or gay rights or minority rights or anything. There's individual rights. Everybody has an individual right to their life, and they should be treated equally under the law. And this is not because government says so. My belief is that it's a natural God-given right to your life and your liberty. Now, what would be the consequence of this if our governments did this? Well, if it's your life and it's your liberty, wouldn't it be correct to assume that the fruits of your labor are also yours to keep? My goodness, that would be a challenging thought. What does that mean? There wouldn't be an income tax? That is right. We wouldn't have income taxes because it would be your money. Then everybody would start worrying, well, how do you pay for the government? Well, why don't we have a lot less government? We wouldn't have to worry about that. That's what I'd like. The best thing to try to work in this direction is to have a rule of law. In the States, it's the Constitution. All of us take the oath to follow the Constitution. But lo and behold, everybody takes the same oath, and everybody has a different interpretation of the Constitution. And they don't lose any sleep over it. So the rule of law doesn't work. So you have to have a rule of law, but you have to have quality people of character who will actually follow it. But restraints have to be placed. Our Constitution was written not to restrain the people. If you read it carefully, it was written to restrain the government. The government, thou shalt not do this, this, and this, and stay out of the personal business and the economic business of all individuals. Now, one issue that I've addressed quite frequently, and I think is important, because what has happened probably over the last 100 years is we've taken this concept of liberty, which I think our founders understood pretty well in writing the Constitution, that liberty was life, liberty was a right to your life, a right to your liberty, and right to keep what you earn. But for somehow, a while ago, it turned out that people took liberty and chopped it in two. They talked about personal liberty, your lifestyle, your religious values, your personal values, your sexual values, all these social things. Oh, well, we can't allow you to just do what you want. You might do dumb things. And the other group says, yes, but we can't have economic liberty because there's always somebody who's going to suffer. People will suffer, and we have to make sure that there's equal distribution. So there's some people will object to that and protect economic liberty, and some will protect personal liberty. My belief is if you believe in liberty, you will protect economic liberty and personal liberty, and they're all one and the same. This also offers a political opportunity because generally from my viewpoint, of course, from the States, is that the left is a little bit better, but not really all that good in protecting personal lifestyles. And the right is generally better, even though, we have conservatives in the States that aren't all that conservative. But they generally are known to protect economic liberty as well. But if there is an appeal for liberty to bring people together, why shouldn't we be able to get people of all persuasions to come together to defend liberty? Not so much that everybody will use their liberty in the same manner, but they want their liberty because of their personal use. The big challenge, though, economically and socially, is if you get your personal liberty and you get your economic liberty and you don't do well, or if you do harm to yourself or you can't take care of yourself, you can't go bugging your neighbor through your member of the parliament and say, well, I didn't do so well, so I want you to go to my neighbor and get something and take care of me. You have to assume responsibility for all your actions if you expect to assume the benefits of all your actions. What I've come across in the United States in these last 5 years is a dramatic change in attitude, exciting change, and it's especially with so many young people as I go to our college campuses. And that is, there's a recognition of what I'm saying is true, that there is a disconnect between many who are making a lot of money and doing well and getting the bailouts and those that are suffering. You know, the programs, our housing programs, were designed to make sure everybody had a home. And it was magic. Buy a home for $100,000. In a few years, it's worth $150,000. It's magic. It's a cure-all. So, and everybody qualified for credit. Now, Austrian economics teaches that if you create a lot of credit, artificially low interest rates, overbuilding, you have a bubble, and the bubble will burst. So the programs were designed to make sure all poor people had a house, and they would get rich because the value of the house would go up. The truth is you can't create wealth out of nothing, and it would end, and it did end. So what happened to the poor people? They lost their jobs, they lost their houses, and the people who were doing all the speculating and making billions and billions of dollars, guess who got bailed out? They got bailed out. And then the poor and the middle class get upset. I think we as libertarians and conservatives come up short in identifying with the people who get messed up with this economic policy. And we lose the moral high ground because those who want to use force to take from productive people and give to the non-productive, they win by saying, yeah, we really care. But if we really care and we have humanitarian instincts and we want to help people, we'll argue for the cause of liberty, sound money, and free market economics. But the recognition is there today, and most people now are starting to realize it's not sustainable. Even those who are able to work in the system and trade the stocks and make money, they know it's coming to an end and that these debts are unsustainable. Our cities and our counties and our federal government are all, you know, at that point where they can't reverse the tide. Now, the one advantage that we have in the States is the fact that since World War II, we have been the economic military powerhouse. Economic wealth and military power conveys confidence in the system. It conveys confidence in the currency. And it was designated that the U.S. dollar would be the reserve currency of the world after World War II. And this gave us great privilege. So we immediately abused that privilege from 1945 up until 1971. And as predicted, when I was starting to read economics and the predictions were made in the 50s and the 60s, this can't work. You just can't print dollars and pretend that if anybody comes and any foreigner, Americans weren't even allowed to own gold, any foreigner comes down and puts down $35, they get an ounce of gold. Well, we went from 700 ounces of gold to less than 300 million ounces of gold, and it had to end, and it did. The market ended it, so it broke down, and it was an eye-opener for me, August 15th, 1971. And I thought at the time, oh, this is a big, big moment, and what is it going to lead to? And I thought a lot of trouble, and we're still suffering from that problem. But I never dreamed that the confidence worldwide would last so long, that there would be such a trust in the dollar. Today, we're suffering from a severe inflation. There's not confidence in the economy, and that's why real investment, we're in the States, we're not rebuilding our steel plants and all. I mean, we're not productive. The only thing that we're capable of producing that the world's still willing to take are dollars. But I don't understand how long or why they will, but they keep doing it. But there is an interest in protecting the dollar. I mean, even if the Chinese became unhappy with us and they could bring us down because they have $1.3 trillion, I mean, they could mess up the markets pretty well. But why do they want to ruin their dollar holdings? So in a way, we're holding people hostage. And as long as there's trust in the dollar and confidence in the dollar and confidence in us, this thing is going to continue. But what it does is builds a bigger and bigger distortion, a bubble. And the biggest bubble from my estimation today, is in the bonds, because you're getting negative interest rates and people are still buying them. And someday that will come to an end, and things will have to change. So we still have prosperity. You see it here, you see it in the States, but the prosperity too often is based on debt, and that is where the limitation is. So we have seen the consequence in some of the European countries, like in Greece and Spain and Italy and these other places. Well, it will come, it will affect all of us, and if it affects the dollar, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And this is why I believe that a revolutionary spirit and the change of things, the acceptance of the fact that we're working with a failed system. The Keynesian system doesn't work. It's not socialism in the sense of government controlling wages and prices and supply and demand, which there's no way, because the most important thing in a free market are prices. If you're in business and you have to decide something, if your competition is giving the same product at a better price, you better do better, because in the market, in a free market, really the determining factor is the consumer. The consumer is king. It's not the labor union. It's not labor. It's not the businessman. The businessman should never be protected. But today, this is what's happening. We protect our businessmen all the time. We bail them out. We have a military-industrial complex way out of proportion to what it should be. And for this reason, the people have allowed this to go on so long that now it will come to an end once this debt is recognized. Now you say, well, if you don't have wage and price controls, why do we have such distortion? It has to do with the monetary system. It's the fixing of interest rates. Oh yes, isn't it wonderful? Interest rates are zero. Bernanke, Greenspan was doing this for a long time. And most people can see Greenspan had interest rates too low, too long, and created this distortion. So Bernanke said, that is true. So what does he do? He lowers them even more. You know, and they even print more money. So it just goes on and on. But the big point there is the fixing of interest rates lower than the market. You cannot run a sound, growing economic market without savings rates that are honest. They have a system of government today with central banking where they are the central economic planners. And they come in and we get into a recession, which is essentially what happened here. And they say, well, we get out of the recession by printing more money and lowering interest rates. And then we'll wait and see. Well, they say, well, what happens if prices start to rise, which they will? Oh, then we have to slow the economy. So a booming economy with growth is corrected by causing slower economy. Now, if you have a free market and the economy is booming and there's economic growth of 25%, nobody ever wants to turn it off. I mean, so we purposely turn it off to crash the economy to manipulate prices. So they're price fixers. They're worried about prices of commodities, and they're going to fix it always with central economic planning. We had that debate at the Constitution, at the time of our writing of our Constitution, between Hamilton and Jefferson. Jefferson was a hard money guy. He was against the central bank. Hamilton argued for the central bank, and they had the first national bank. So we've been arguing this case for a long time. Guess which side I come down on? I say no central banking and no Federal Reserve System. But that could be designed not with anything fed in one day. We'll give them a week or two. Just introduce competition. Allow competition to exist. Today in the States, we have a gentleman that instituted the Liberty Dollar and let people use their own silver dollar. And the Constitution said only silver and gold can be legal tender. Well, he was immediately arrested. His gold and silver to the tune of millions of dollars was confiscated. He never committed a crime, never committed fraud, never told a lie. And he was charged with counterfeiting and terrorism. So I would say that's overstepping on the bounds and abuse of liberty and common sense. The one reason why a lot of people object to giving too much freedom of choice to the individual is that if you have your social liberty to make your decision about your own lifestyle, you might do things that others might not think appropriate. You say, well, we have to take care of people and guide them. And I think what has to happen, what is the problem there, is if people do things that they don't approve of, they see it, they become more intolerant. But if you legalize freedom of choice in personal behavior, it doesn't mean you endorse the behavior. I mean, if we have legalization of religious freedom, you know, some people have this religion, another religion, and some people have no religion. But most people will accept that. Well, that's rather tolerant. But when it comes to lifestyle, and this also affects things like, we've just, in the last 30, 40 years, we've spent about $5 to $6 trillion enforcing laws, which I think make no sense whatsoever, has caused our prisons to have more prisoners than China, and that is the irrationality of the drug laws that tell people what they can put in their mouths and what they can put in their bodies. I think the drug war needs repealed. But at the same time, you know, I have children and grandchildren. I'm a physician. I think drugs are very, very dangerous. But if you compare the so-called illegal drugs to prescription drugs, a lot more people die from the prescription drug abuse. Right now, we're suffering from an epidemic of suicide from some of our veterans, and we have a lot of violence in our schools. And somebody just did a study, and they took the last 10 episodes of violence where young people went and took guns and irrationally shot people. All 10 of them were on psychotropic drugs. So this is a different problem than some people might think. One thing I want to talk about for a minute or two are the labels. This is a conservative group, but I'm seen as a conservative. But even the term conservative have relative terms. You know, if you were in the Soviet Union when it was starting to come apart, the conservatives were the ones who wanted to conserve Marxism, and the liberals were the ones who wanted to believe in liberty. The founders of this of the United States called themselves liberals. And that term was, you know, in many ways destroyed and undermined. Today, you know, one of the terms that I used to always have sympathy for because it sounds good. Shouldn't we all be progressive? Shouldn't we want to look into the future and see new things? But progressives, I don't know how the word is used up here, but in the States, it's a bad term if you're a conservative. So maybe that's true here too. Very nice to be here and see so much enthusiasm because I think we live in very important times, and it's not an American issue or a Canadian issue or a European issue. It is a worldwide issue because the times that we live in are different in many, many ways from my viewpoint, because I believe we're in a transition. We're in a transition from a system of economics and politics that's ending. Just as the biggest event in my lifetime was the disintegration of the Soviet Empire. It came to an end, and it was predicted as early as 1912 by Mises that it's not viable. You can't have socialism. You have to have a pricing system. And it came down, but it wasn't replaced by the concept of liberty. It was replaced by what we call interventionism. And that's what we've been living with. Intervention has been around for a long time. Ever since the Magna Carta, there's been bits and pieces coming about. But right now, in the States, I would say that we've been going backwards in the last 100 years. We have undermined our monetary system, our free market system, our personal liberties. We have become interventionists overseas. We endorse the idea of central banking. We don't believe in sound money. So in the last 100 years, we have gone on the wrong direction, and it is coming to an end, and the limitation is the debt. And yet the left, the far left, will say that debt doesn't matter. When you get into a problem, what you want to do is to spend more money. So we get into trouble economically. Governments spend too much money, they borrow too much money, they print too much money, interest rates are too low for too long. As is, government planning, welfareism, inflationism, central banking, deficits are all right. And this type of system comes to an end too, and that's what we're facing today. In almost every country in the West, it's debt. Debt is the big problem because it was taught for many, many years, the Keynesian theory of economics, that deficits don't matter, and if you come up short, you keep taxing the people till the point where they can't be taxed anymore, and then you keep borrowing until you can't borrow anymore. Then they think, well, it's magic. All you have to do is print the money, and it's going to work out, and you can do that for a while. My approach to all this is that's all completely wrong, and it's coming to an end, and there is a replacement, and it can be found in the cause of liberty. But then the term libertarian comes up, and that has a controversial connotation. So you have moderates and libertarians and conservatives and liberals and progressives and socialists. And terminology is very tricky. So I've simplified my terminology for what I believe in to a simple term, and that is interventionism. If you believe in interventionism across the board, that means you want the government to tell us what to do with our personal lives, you want the government to tell us what to do with our economic activity, and you allow the government to tell other people around the world what to do. So guess what? I've come down on the side of saying I am a non-interventionist. And that's what freedom is all about. Freedom's, the term has been